according to the Kemites. And so when they expressed religion, what they were trying to do was to capture the essence of what they had understood through revelation from scientific study. And so it's extremely important to realize that it was through the work of science that people became spiritual. We have it almost backwards in Western culture from this particular point of view. In other words, we receive, in many cases, religion without having to do anything for it. We don't have to study anything other than catechism, so to speak. But with the exception of a very few religions, few seem to have an idea that study of the natural world is in fact also associated with study of the spiritual world, and that one depends upon the other, or both depend upon each other, if you would put it that way. So that's a very important point.
Okay, Master Key number 10.
Number 10 is that the Kemetic people, I mention this because so often you hear interpretations of Kemetic religion as being a polytheistic religion, and without getting
polytheistic meaning
the belief in many gods as opposed to the belief in one great God. And again, you can believe whatever you want to believe, but just to be historically accurate, the Kemites were always monotheistic, never polytheistic. And because people don't understand Master Key number 9, symbolic thought, they misinterpret this principle. And they see with all of these different gods, instead of seeing different aspects of one God, they see different gods. And to the ancient Kemites, they were people who tended to think holistically, and there was always a great hidden God who had many powers or manifestations. There was no difference between, for example, in thinking in holistic terms, between science and religion. They were all the same. You couldn't separate science from religion. Between the sacred and the secular, all life was sacred. So there's no secular, you know, we'll behave ourselves on Sunday and let the rest of the week take care of itself. No caste system, no church-state separation, no school, science, and religion separation. You know, the idea of the separation of church and state would have been unthinkable to the Kemite. So that they thought holistically, and at the center of that holism was a spiritual base, because their whole purpose of the society was to seek the divine.
Okay.
Okay. Another master key or principle is to be aware of chronological order, especially the golden ages, and compare the golden ages to the period. Let me go to this chart here, because we've talked about this before.
Okay, 1 minute.
If we look at this is chronological order: 3000, 2000, 1000, birth of Christ, 1000 after Christ, and 2000 after Christ. Well, if we look at the golden ages of Kemet, first golden age, and compare it to the period, you know, we look at the pictures of the pharaohs who were here, and we compare it to the absence of data here. For example, there's very little data about this intermediate period. Although it wasn't a foreign invasion, it was an internal upheaval. This is a period of disorder, so you have very little to point to. You don't have great pyramids of this time, for example.
The 7th through the 10th.
Great temples, the 7th through the 10th dynasty. But when you go to the 11th and 12th dynasty, suddenly you have this explosion of literature and culture again. Then you get this invasion, and that's where you don't have any. Try to go to a museum and get something from the 13th, 14th, or 15th dynasty. You can't find it. Then ask yourself, in the dynasties where you have the data, who were the pharaohs and the queens? That's what I've been showing you. Same thing here. Suddenly the 18th and 19th dynasty are the grand dynasties. Ramesses II, Nefertiti, Tutmosis, all of those. Look at who's ruling, and then here's the period. You know, this is the second intermediate period of an invasion. This is another period, the period being the gap between the golden ages. And you could also call this a period too, a kind of a late period, which is after the 25th dynasty, which was a native black African-led dynasty. And this is a period, and then you know that if you look for the people here, you'll see Alexander, you'll see Persians, and you'll see so-and-so. But the high-tech, high-developed periods are always the native periods. And so it's very important to keep the chronological order. Otherwise, you will have people who will confuse what was happening in Greece with what was happening during the Pyramid Age. And you'll have people saying that Africans got help building the pyramid. And there was nobody, no major group of people, no large group of people, even in Africa at the time of the pyramid, other than African people. That's why you have to have the chronological order straight.
This is the remainder of number...
Okay, and the rest of that, note that the Greco-Roman period comes at the end of Kemet. Cultural Kemet is still in operation. In other words, during the time of the Greeks, the Kemetic people were still operating their culture. The Greeks didn't change that. Although the Greek culture changed. Greek culture changed because they came to Africa and copied African people. Also note that this period, being the most recent, is the source of most of the material in museums. So this will confuse you. If you go to museums, you'll see many busts of Greek people dressed up like Africans, Roman people dressed up like Africans. They're mummifying their bodies. They're burying their bodies in these caskets that are copied on the style of the Greeks. They have their pictures inscribed on the wall. And so there's so much of this material from 300 BC and so little of the material that survives from 2700 BC that unless you're careful, you would think that the Greek period was the typical period. It is not the typical period, it's the exceptional period.
Okay, let us go on.
Right, so this then sums it up as the dynastic chart. Then we can see where the Greeks and Romans fall in this, and you can see that they fall clearly toward literally after all the developmental periods are over. There is literally no Kemetic cultural development after the 25th dynasty. Okay. After that, it's all imitation or destruction.
Okay, master key number 12.
Master key number 12 is that in order to get a real picture of who the people were, you need to get as many pictures of a king, queen as possible. More than one picture. Like with Nefertiti, we only usually see one picture. If we see two pictures of her, you will see that the one picture has to be in error. Okay. So that you always get as many pictures as possible so that you can sit them side by side, and that will give you an answer to the question of whether these were black or white people. Okay. So if you look here, this would be a picture of Amenhotep the second, the grandfather of King Tutankhamun. The next slide will show Amenhotep the third, the father of Akhenaten and King Tut. And so if you show this as a family sequence, then you begin to get a sense of what the racial makeup is. This would be Amenhotep III and his wife Tea, which we showed before. The next would be their son, Akhenaten. So you can see if we put them together now, then the son looks like the parents. If you see this picture of Akhenaten by himself, many people can't explain him except as a departure from the norm, as they've said. So if we look at the next slide, we'll see...
because they're looking at pictures that are outside the family.
Right, because they're looking at pictures outside the family. So they say he looks abnormal for a white person. Right. And that's true. But he wasn't a white person.
Right. Master key number 13. Okay,
the last master key is that Egyptology, and notice I refer to myself as a chematologist. I'm a student of ancient Kemet. Egyptology takes the name that the Greeks used, Egypt, for the name of the academic discipline. So that must mean they're studying the period after the natives, apart from the natives. They really don't think that they are, but I'm very insistent on this terminology. Egyptology, which comes largely after Napoleon, is mainly the product of European scholars that emerged during the slavery and colonization period. That point cannot be overemphasized. The meaning of that. For example, if Africans are precluded from doing the research, from digging up, evaluating, publishing, disseminating information, and if the people who have ulterior motives, designs on the African continent, are the ones who are writing the history of the African continent, doing the research on the African continent, you have bias almost on its face. But we don't even have to look at bias on his face. We can look at Martin Bernal's excellent work in Black Athena, and we can look at, in particular,